Good evening, and how are you all? I am Trudy, and I'm here today with our new scriptures that are going to be starting in Exodus 7 through 9. Um, as we start to see here, it's starting to get very, very intense because what we have here is we have Moses um, that's actually continuing to talk to Pharaoh. And basically, the same demands are going on as in previous. So it says, So the Lord said to Moses, See, I have made you as God, as a Pharaoh, and Aaron, your brother, shall be your prophet. And so what he's establishing here is that already that God is actually providing Moses with some credibility here, is what's going on. Because he says already, I've made you as a God to Pharaoh. So the way that Pharaoh looked at him was that he was powerful, and Aaron, your brother, shall be your prophet, so that he would be your spokesman that would tell her the truths that the God would actually speak. And then he goes on and he says, So you shall speak all that I command of you, and Aaron your brother shall tell Pharaoh to send the children of Israel out of the land. So, what we actually have here, good evening, Sister Corey and Sister Felicia. Thank you for joining me. So, what we actually have here is that we are establishing a right at this point, a right of authority. So we're going to start to see how a lot of things start to happen when we harden our heart, because that is going to be kind of the key of the scriptures that we're going to learn about when you harden your heart, what actually happens. And so as they're going through and they're presenting themselves to Pharaoh and they're moving through, and there comes the very first um, miracle or miraculous thing that actually happens, and it happens in Aaron's rod. That's when we pick up on about the 8th verse, and it says, Then the Lord spoke to Moses and Aaron, saying, When Pharaoh speaks to you, saying, Show a miracle for yourselves, then you shall say to Aaron, Take your rod and cast it before Pharaoh, and let it be a serpent. Now, this was a kind of a power play where um, God actually was kind of baiting Pharaoh in, making him kind of play his own game, even though even though he's not aware that he's been baited at this point. But God is actually playing mind games with him. So what he does is he's showing him that I have power. But here, what did Pharaoh looked at? Pharaoh looked at what was going on with this particular display of power, and then all of a sudden, all of his magicians and all those different people that uh, that could cast spells and things like that, they came out and they were like, "Oh, you're not doing nothing. That's nothing. We could do that too." But the thing about it is that once that Aaron placed the rod down, that with the power of God, and then the other people that were the magicians and the soothsayers and all these other type of people that were inside of the kingdom that reported to Pharaoh, they did theirs. But the type of serpent that when we start to study about it a little more, instead of it being an average serpent, it was mainly more so, they said, like a crocodile, a larger one, because what we'll find is that God is mimicking or mocking Pharaoh all along the way, because everything that he believes in, God is showing and using against him. So the crocodile was known as one of their gods of the Nile River. So this particular rod that Aaron put down actually ate up all the snakes that they had actually produced. So he's showing him who is powerful, because Pharaoh does not believe in who God is. And this is what this whole chapter starts to establish, to actually make him recognize who God is. Okay, so then after that happened, we start to have a series of plagues that actually start to happen, because of the point that Pharaoh's heart is so hard that he won't believe anything. God is kind of taking this act that, okay, you don't believe me? I'm going to show you. You're going to see how powerful I am. So he goes through a stage where we see in the entirety that there were 10 plagues that actually happened. But we'll talk about, I think we get up to the sixth plague in the seventh through the ninth verse. So then it goes on. The first plague was the water becomes blood. And so what happened was that Pharaoh heart is hard, and he refuses to let the people go, because that was always the request of Moses, that when God gave him the charge to go to him, and he said, "Tell Pharaoh to let my people go." But Pharaoh is still playing that game like nobody's run up here telling me what to do and how to run my stuff. I'm not letting nobody go. So he said, "Okay, so you're not going to do that." So once again, he says, "Go to Pharaoh in the morning when he comes out of the water, and you shall stand by the river's bank to meet him. And then when you actually meet him, extend the rod, and that was turned into a serpent, and take it in your hand, and you shall say to him, 'The Lord God of the Hebrews has sent me to say, let my people go, that they may serve me in the wilderness. But indeed, not until you would not with your heart.'" So here we have what's happening is that he's told him, and every time he's saying, "This is the reason why I'm asking you to do these things." Excuse me. "Why I'm asking you to do these things, because I'm asking you to let my people go. You've not done anything to claim these people. They're not part of your body, your bloodline. You've not won them through a war. You have not conquered them. You have not made them prisoners. None of these things. You just came in a place and just took over. So you didn't legally, by any type of legalistic way, become an owner of them. But now you just giving all kind of rules about why they can and cannot do anything." So what happened was, it says that at that point, um, the rod was extended in their hand, and he touched the rod into the Nile water. Now, the one thing about the Nile was that the Nile carried a great significance because it was a waterway that carried much of the wealth for Egypt, because it was an expressway. And so this is what made Egypt so profitable, because it was the only ingress and egress that there was. When you start to study about all of the different rivers and stuff that all flowed into the Nile. So it made it a major thoroughfare. And so what happened was he didn't believe it. So what he did was touch the rod in the water, and bam, the water turned to blood, not only in the Nile River, but every piece of water that was in a bucket, whether it was in a stone pitcher, wherever it may have been, because of the command of God, that what the plague that he put upon Pharaoh because of his hard heart, this is what happened. So it took place, and there was nothing there. And what happened, because the blood was in the water, it made all the fish die. And because the fish died, in essence, was that the fish that were in the river started to stink. So it started to stink all over this place that was once pleasant, but now is very uncomfortable. But God is showing his power in every situation. No matter what you may think and how you think you have rule over something, he's still showing you who exactly he is. So then the magicians came, and they wanted to prove that, oh, that we can do this too. So they found another well, and they actually touched this well, and it was clear water, and they touched it and made it turn to blood. But they were idiots, because guess what? Nobody has any water anywhere now, because all of the water is blood and is not inhabitable to actually drink at this particular point. That was plague number one. As we move on to the second plague, the second plague is coming up, and the Lord spoke to Moses, "Go to Pharaoh and say to him, 'Let my people go.'" Now, God is consistent. Every time that he goes, he doesn't go around bullying people or anything like that. But what he's actually saying at this point is that I have a purpose for why I'm coming to you, Pharaoh, and I'm appealing to you. He didn't just come in and snatch him, he could have done all those things. But what he was trying to do was to get Pharaoh to come to a point of repentance, to actually acknowledge who he was. Because if you remember about the Egyptians actually had many pagan gods. So they had a God for everything, a God for the sky, a God for the water, a God for fertility, a God for food. So there are all these different type of gods that they actually had. So then he comes and he's asking at this particular time, once again, let my people go. And then he says, um, but if you refuse to let them go, behold, I will smite all of your territory with frogs, so that the river shall bring forth frogs abundantly, which shall go up and come into your home, all over your people, in your bedroom, your kitchen, everywhere that you got, it's going to be inhabited by frogs. Now, I don't know about you, but I just cannot imagine frogs everywhere throughout my house. I just could not do that. But even with the threat of these things happening to it, yet Pharaoh still kept his heart hardened and didn't even pay attention to it. He was not moved about it. So he was just like, okay, but whatever. But I'm not letting them go. Okay, that's just it. So then the Lord spoke to Moses, said to Aaron, stretch out your hand with your rod over the streams and over the rivers and over the ponds and cause the frogs to come up to the Egypt land. So Aaron was obedient, did exactly what he said, what God had instructed him to do. And then once he did that, so Aaron stretched out his hand over the waters of Egypt, and the frogs came up and covered the land of Egypt. Now, can you imagine that? I cannot imagine. When you got a bunch of ants, ants drive me crazy. But just to think that you had as many ants, frogs, as you would have ants, and how, what it looks like when you see a trail of ants, that's really crazy. But yet, here he was being warned, because we have to look at all these things that are going on, that God is warning him every time and giving him an opportunity to actually um, change and not have such a hard heart, but to do as he asked, to let his people go, not because he was just letting them randomly just frolic all over the place, but because they could come and that they could serve their God. And this was the reason why these things came. And then here comes the crazy magicians and the enchantments, and they're coming there and they're doing the same thing. And then when they touched and there were frogs again, they were able to reproduce these things. So then Pharaoh called for Moses and Aaron and said, entreat the Lord that he may take away the frogs from me and from my people, and I will let your people go. So here he is once again lying and talking about, if all right, I give. Okay, if you tell your Lord this and make him take away these people, because when it says to entreat, it means to talk on my part, to cause it to stop. And so he wanted to be represented to Jesus, I mean to God, so that he would no longer have these frogs, because he didn't expect as many frogs, because it said it covered the entire land of Egypt. So there were just frogs all over the place. And Moses said to Pharaoh, accept the honor, saying, when I shall intercede for you, for your servants, and for your people, to destroy the frogs from your houses, that they may return to in the river only, because the frogs that were in the river actually represented another god. Now, here once again, God is showing that he is greater than the gods that they have, that he's making mockery almost of these particular gods. So what he said was that I will allow these frogs to go back to the river, but I will kill all the rest of them. Now, once again, when God has passed judgment, what's happened is all the frogs are actually died. They actually died. They're dead. And they had to keep up all these frogs. And once again, the land stank. It just stank, stank, stank. You got dead frogs all over the place. This is exactly what's taking place here. Then Moses went out and from Pharaoh, and Moses cried out to the Lord concerning these things. And as I said, all the frogs were dead. Then we come back, and then it says, but when Pharaoh saw there was relief, he says, he hardened his heart and did not heed them as the Lord he said. Now, how many of us actually come back and we are in dire situations and we can't see our way and our backs are pressed against the wall and we pray, Lord, please, if you help me, if you get me out of this, I swear you won't ever have to worry about me. I won't do it anymore. But as soon as that release hits, you start to slowly forget about those things or immediately go back to what you were doing. That you don't give any credence to your word because, see, your word becomes your bond. That's all that a person can hold you to, accountable to. And this is what's happening here with Pharaoh. And every time it's just like he trying to play God. It's like, mm-mm, what are you doing? So then it comes on, he gives them another plague. This is the third plague that starts to happen. So actually says, so the Lord said to Moses, now this particular time was a little different because he didn't warn Pharaoh like he had before. So it says, and he says to Aaron, stretch out your rod and strike the dust of the land so that it may become throughout all the land in Egypt. And they did so. For Aaron stretched out his hand, and this particular time, it says the earth, and it became lice on every man and every animal that they actually had. Now, when I studied a little more about that, they were saying that um, the lice just covered everything. And if you ever know what lice look like, they're the most gross thing you could ever imagine. But they're actually eating and feeding off of you, and they were covered over everybody. Nobody actually escaped these things. And then so he had all of these things all over them, and then said all the dust. So imagine the way that you would, how LeBron comes out when he puts that chalk in his hand and he does like this, and it's just dust everywhere. That's just how the lights were coming out all over the place. So everybody was covered, but the magicians, here they come again, trying to prove who they are. And then so they worked their enchantment to bring forth lights, to try to bring forth lice, but they couldn't. Now, here the example is actually telling us that the magicians that actually have shown up so far, they were powered by more than just illusionists, meaning that to make you think you did something, but they had Satan that was empowering them to actually replicate some things. But see, Satan can only go so far because God is the ultimate power, He is the ultimate creator, and Satan can only mimic, but he cannot create. This is the thing that's happening. So these magicians, the things that they've done before has only been mimics. But here with the lice, even though they tried, they were unable to create these things. They were able to, because see, before the water was there, before the frogs were there. But here's something that came out of the dust that had to be created. So this is where they found that they could not do anything. And so there were lice all over the man and the animals and all these different things. And then the magician said to Pharaoh, they had to come and tell him, this is of the finger of God. But Pharaoh's heart grew hard, and he did not heed them, and just as the Lord had said. So God already knew basically how Pharaoh was going to interact to these things, but he was trying to give him a chance. He just like, look, knucklehead, I'm giving you chance after chance. What else do I have to do for you to understand who I am and what I'm asking you to do? So then it goes on to our fourth plague, and it says, and the Lord said to Moses, rise early in the morning and stand therefore before Pharaoh as he comes out of the water. So this was a ritual for Pharaoh that he would bathe into the Nile for all of these reasons, because it was actually a paganistic reason. Why? Because he was paying homage in the morning to these pagan gods. And one other thing about the lice, when the lice actually came, the Pharaoh, they actually have sacred animals. So they were not able to present to the pagan gods their sacrifices because you could not give them anything that was unclean. So the priests, because they kept themselves separate and they could not have unclean or unholy things, they were separated too. So they were missing out doing their rituals all during this time. And this is where God is showing his ultimate power, that he can restructure and rearrange anything that we have going on. So then he goes on and he's once again, he says, let my people go, let my people go, let my people go, let my people go, is exactly what he's asking he's asking Pharaoh once again, let my people go. And so he will not let his people go. Sorry about that. He will not let his people go. And then once again, we have it that he's doing another plague because he's hard headed and he will not do it. He says, I will send swarms of flies on you and your servants and over your people in your house. And the house of Egypt shall be full of swarms of flies, and also on the ground which you stand on. So, but here was the exception. Now, can you imagine flies everywhere? I hate flies. I hate if there's a torture point for me, it's a fly. So I hate a fly, but can you imagine them all over the place? And the thing about these particular flies were that they were biting insects. So in the study, it kind of showed that through the translation, they probably were more like mosquitoes. So the mosquitoes were eating these people up, just eating, they were everywhere and they were devouring these people. But here was the kicker this time, where God was showing his power. He was saying that all these things will happen in Egypt, but my children, the Israelites, most of them lived in a place called Goshen. And so he said, but my people over in Goshen will not have this calamity that will come upon them. So they went on, and the thick swarms of flies came over the houses, and they were eating up everything. And then here again, Pharaoh said to Moses, please, please go sacrifice to your God in the land. And Moses says, it's not right to do so, for you, we will be sacrificing the abomination of the Egyptians to the Lord. If the sacrifice the abomination of the Egyptian before their eyes, then they will not stone us. He was like, give us some relief. Just go right there and do what you got to do. And then Moses was like, wait a minute. No, no. You think I'm crazy? I'm gonna do this, and then all of a sudden, once I'm done, you're gonna come over and kill me. Not today. That's not gonna happen, Pharaoh. So he goes on, and then Pharaoh allows him to go ahead and go to God and actually um, out in the wilderness and actually make this sacrifice so that he can actually do it. So when Moses goes out from him and to entreat, Pharaoh asks him to entreat the Lord once again. Now, every time he's asking him to speak up on my part. And then he removed the swarm of flies from Pharaoh and his servants and the house of people. Not one even remained. But Pharaoh hardened his heart again. He just don't tell the truth. You just cannot hold him to anything. So then we come down to chapter 9, and we're at the fifth plague. And the fifth plague, what happens is then the Lord said to Moses, go into Pharaoh and tell him. And he says that let the Hebrews go. He will let my people go that they may serve me. For if we refuse to let them go and still uphold them, and behold, the hand of the Lord will be on your cattle in the field, and on your horses, and on your donkeys, and your camels, and your oxen, on your sheep, and a very severe pestilence. So now, what he's actually said, that I'm going to cause a disease to come upon all of your animals because you don't choose to serve me, because you don't choose to acknowledge me, because you won't even consider all the things that I've done to you and all the things that I've shown you that are in my purview as power to actually do and make things happen. You still want to act like crazy, like I haven't done anything. So I'm going to hit you a little harder this time. And then what I was telling you before about the actual diseases that happened, because all of the time, everything in Egypt was tied to a particular god. So here, once again, they were, when I was studying, there was one point that they said that Egypt had actually lost a war one time because the opposers actually released cattle on the war field, and because the Egyptians were so afraid that they would hit one of the animals, that they actually lost the war. So talk about strategy, that they reverenced something so much that they would lose a war because of it. But here now, God is hitting them more and more severe each and every time. So then he goes on and he sees everything that's going on. I told you once again, the pagans are not able to have sacrifices because all these things are going on. So the Lord did this thing on the next day, and all the livestock of Egypt died. But the livestock of the children of Israel, not one died. There was nothing that was lost. Pharaoh was so mad about it, he sent it because he wanted to see it for himself. So he sent his people out to say, what's happening over there in Goshen? And they actually come back and let him know. Not one of theirs are dead. All of us, we out of here. We messed up. But nothing has happened to them. But the heart of Pharaoh, even with that, will not yield, and it was still hard. Then we come to the sixth plague. The sixth plague was that, so the Lord said to Moses and Aaron, take for yourself handfuls of ashes from a furnace. So it's almost like taking black soot out of our fireplaces that we would know today. And Moses was to scatter it towards the heavens. So, take it. This is all that Moses was supposed to do. And it will come and to find us and land on the land of Egypt, and will cause boils to break out and sores on the man and the beast throughout the land. So he basically caused all of these painful, inflammatory type boils. Big, you know, if you've ever had acne really bad, or had hair bumps or things like that, the excruciating pain because of the inflammation and things like that are going on in your body, because there is inflammation and poison basically there. This is what started to happen all over the bodies of all the men and the animals. So here we have again, they're in another predicament, and they cause the boils to break out in sores on man and beast, and the magicians could not stand before Moses because of the boils, for the boils were on the magicians and all of the Egyptians at this point. But the Lord hardened the heart of Pharaoh, and he did not heed, just as the Lord had spoken to Moses before. So then we had the seventh plague that actually came. Now you would think that the knucklehead would get some kind of sense, but he didn't. So then what he says at that point, we're still at the same thing. Let my people go, Pharaoh. Stop tripping. Let him go. It's time to just give it up. But no, Pharaoh was just a hard head. And here we go with our next actual plague. And what he told him was that he would actually release hail into all throughout the land. Now, when he told him that, Pharaoh was kind of like, yeah, right. It really doesn't rain like that in the desert. They don't get hail in the desert. So he was just like looking like, okay, we're going to get hail. But what he did not expect was the hail and the lightning that would come. So what happened was Moses followed God's instruction, and then the plague actually hit Egypt. And what took place was that they had hail, and he told them the hail would come down, and any man that would not be covered in his house would be killed if they were left exposed. So, this is actually what took place, that many people came. It says it will cause very heavy hail to rain down, such as not seen before in Egypt, and it's founding until now. Therefore, now send and gather your livestock and all that you have in the fields, um, and have them come in. So he brought all of this fear to him, but yet he did not yield to it. And guess what? It came down. It was hail, it was lightning. And when the lightning hit the ground, it also lit up his fields. So the barley and the flax were actually burnt from the fire that was caused by the lightning. This is something that Pharaoh had not anticipated that would actually come. And what we'd have, the same thing that he asked basically Moses to come, help us, stop this, go back to your God and ask him to stop this. Do whatever you need to do. Reach, stretch out your arms, say whatever you need to do. And then it goes and it says, I have sinned this time. The Lord is righteous and my people and I are wicked. Entreat the Lord that there be no more mighty thundering hail, for it is enough. I will let you go, and you shall no longer stay no longer. So Moses said to him, as soon as I have gone out of the city, I will spread out my hands, and the Lord, and the thunder will cease, and there will be no more hail. And you may know that the earth is the Lord's. But as you know for yourself, I know that you will not yet fear the Lord God. So even though Moses was obedient and he did do what he said he would, but he still knew that Here, once again, we have that Pharaoh acts the same way. And then when Pharaoh saw the rain, the hail, the thunder had ceased, he sinned yet more. So he was a knucklehead. So it wasn't gonna matter, no matter what you're gonna do. He's like a diehard. You just got to keep beating him until you just beat him up, and it still didn't matter. And you talk about someone that was supposed to care. He was supposed to care about his people, but he didn't care. With all those calamities coming on these people back to back to back, he showed no compassion or love for these people because he resented God so much and the power of God to recognize who he was. So that is all that we have, 7, 8, and 9. And we've gone through actually 7 plagues. So yet we'll see tomorrow. Join us here once again at 6 o'clock, where it's about time, where we're going through the Bible chronologically to actually make sense of the story so we can understand how it truly functioned and we can have a better capacity and grasp of the Word of God. Thank you for joining and have a great evening.